I don't think this is going to be resolved in
Yeah,
a timely.
no worries. Okay,
And
it's recording.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order for the CMAP Unified Work Program Committee. It is 1:01 p.m.
I think we do need to do attendance tonight, right?
Yep.
I'll start.
Yes.
This is Dan Olson from CMAP.
Dan, can you just call out the names that might be more organized way of doing it?
Yeah, sorry about that. Holly Beineman.
Yes, good morning. This is Holly Beanman, IDOT, Director of Office and Planning and Programming. I also want to mention that I have Bruce Carmichael in the room with me.
Hi, Bruce. Hi, Holly. Angela Manning Hardiman.
Here.
Philip Bonilla.
Here.
Christina Bader.
Here.
Lenny Kanata, I know he had mentioned he might not be able to voice in, but he said he was going to be on the call because he's in transit. So we might not.
I'm here. I got it.
Oh, there you are.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
Hi.
Council of Mayors. Tom Rickert.
Here.
Jason Osborne.
I'm here.
Dave Tomzik.
Dave Tomzik Pace here.
Heather Tabbitt Mullins.
I'm here, thank you.
John Donovan.
Here.
And Tony Greep. I'll just move through the alternates as well. I already identified as here. Dave Seglin from CDOT. Sonali Tandon. Lenny Kanata is identified. He's here. Anyone, the alternates from the counties? Dustin Clark, Metra.
Here.
Dan LaVille, Pace. And Mark Pitstick, RTA. Okay, I think we're good to go.
Great, thanks. Okay, any agenda changes or announcements?
I don't believe so, Holly.
Okay, great. The minutes were included in your packet. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
I second.
Great. All those in favor? I
Aye.
guess do a roll call.
Oh, so that's right.
All right.
Dan, do you want to go?
Yep. Holly Beineman, IDOT.
Aye.
Angela Manning Hardiman.
Aye.
Philip Bonilla.
Aye.
Christina Bader.
Hi.
Lenny Kanata, Council of Mayors.
Yes.
Tom Rickert.
Aye.
Jason Osborne.
Aye.
Dave Tomzik.
Aye.
Heather Tabbitt Mullins.
Hi.
John Donovan and Tony Greep, FHWA and FTA. I'm not sure do they vote on this?
Actually, I think I am a voting member on this.
Oh, okay.
One, so
Sorry.
no, that's all right. I never remembered myself.
Yeah. Did you say aye?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry. All right, and I think that was everybody that we have.
Great, motion passes. Moving on to agenda item 4, the 23 competitive projects process. So CMAP staff, I think, has been working on developing some potential potential ways to evaluate competitive projects and want to open it up for discussion. So I will turn it over to, I believe, Angela.
Sure, thank you, Holly. I'll just give a quick overview. Dan forwarded to committee members what I believe is a outline of how, it's very similar to what we did before, an outline of the timeline we would put forth for the call for projects. And included in that same documentation, we included 2 models to evaluate projects and to select projects. He did research, and Dan, you can chime in on it, but he did quite a bit of research. And what he determined is that this format that we put forth in front of you is pretty uniform. Whether it was for the selection of projects, whether it was for the selection of a vendor for a project, it was pretty universal. What was different about the model was that you could have a weighted approach or a non-weighted approach. So what you have, I believe, in front of you is the 2 approaches. Where I wanted to hope we would spend our time today is talking about evaluation criteria. I believe that's Dan. Well, can you mute? Thank you, Dan. What I wanted to spend time, or I was hoping we could spend time today, is talking about the 2 models, and more importantly, talking about what components of our program we could use to evaluate projects for future call for project programs. So that's kind of where we are. Let me get some feedback on the model. What's the general thought? And did anyone do any research that they want to talk about, maybe presents a different model than what we're proposing today?
And so, Angela, real quick before we start that, can I give you a little spiel about sort of what I dropped?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Chime in.
So just,
you did the research.
I figure since we will be getting to that bigger, that's just the scoring and that stuff, that's sort of the meat of what you're presenting. What I did is I sort of put some Jamboards out there, and it looks like people actually got some responses in there. Just maybe what we could do is start from, what basically my thought process behind this is, like, let's take our typical year that we go through for the UW project selection process, and we're go through the main portions and sort of tweak them, right, and get some discussion going on each of those. And then that scoring part is the main part. And so I don't know if you want to start by going, starting with the process memo, how we do it every year. You'll see there's a couple tweaks. Most of them is basically just moving the dates up. But I think the biggest discussion, and you're right, will be around just the general strategy of ranking the competitive proposals. So
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I guess before we take a deep dive into the models, I would be curious if people, how in general the committee feels about those models, because if that's not an appropriate model, then we've got to talk about that. We have to come to some agreement on if this is the model first. So are there any thoughts about the 2 models, the weighted and non-weighted models that were put forth? Do you think there's a different way we can do it, a better way? So this is kind of where I would like to start the conversation if we can.
So Angela, if you want, I can open my shared screen and move to the Jamboard for that section. Does that sound good? Okay, cool.
Yep, that's perfect.
I tried to build them up as big as possible for people's screens, but I'm not sure. You'll have to let me know if you can't see them. Here we go. So specifically on the model, we can talk about that one. Sorry.
Any thoughts on the model? On is it pretty universal? Is it something that everyone can apply? Are there better models? Dan, why don't you talk about a little where you researched to locate the models?
So my go-to in general was, I mean, a lot of it is on Google, but a lot of it did surround some of the resources I've seen. I was doing my PMP sort of a few years ago, and what the Project Management Institute usually recommends. So a lot of that just sort of came from this, and it kept coming back to the main scorecard that we've all sort of used in the past. But there are some differences. That the main one is we could have a regular sort of scorecard. I'll pull up that thing on set in the memo. So you can just have this basic regular scorecard when you're looking at the projects. As you remember, the way we've done it in the past is we usually send out a score sheet, but it was not the most I don't know, it wasn't the most active score sheet. I think it was literally a 1, 2, or 3, and there is a little bit of improvement on that, I think, because when you have the 1, 2, and 3, we were getting into the weeds during the scoring process where some people were saying 2.7 or 2.6, and I think we want to move away from that. What they basically recommend is basically having a score sheet where you have a gradated scoring gradation, a set of criteria that you determine, and then you score those proposals one by one. I think that larger scoring gradation is key no matter what we do, whether we do just regular scoring or if we do the weighted scoring, because it allows for the separation that we weren't fully getting in the competitive process previously. I think there were a lot of times in the past 5 years that I remember, just as a staff member, there were a lot of times where some projects were just beating each other out by these little points. And, we might want to talk about in this meeting how that affects us. Do we want to do something different? I think a larger scoring gradation where you have like a 0, 5, 10 or a 0, 4, 8, 10, whatever you guys decide you want to do will help sort of separate those projects. So and then I'll just mention quickly with the weighted one, it's basically the same as this regular, just giving it a score. But what you're doing here is you're giving relative weights to your criteria. So if one year you want to propose a specific criteria that is more focused, I don't know, on safety or something like that, you can give that more weight. And I think a lot of you may do that currently in your current project selection things. But these were the basic two. And, I spent a couple hours sort of researching. Everything sort of came back to these two models. So if you have anything different, feel free to propose it. This was just what I wanted to put out there for reaction and to get people sort of talking. So I can go back to there were a couple comments on the Jamboard, so we could start there. So the first comment that was on the Jamboards for ranking scoring of proposals, and I'm going to read it, but then whoever sort of put it in there, if you can just comment. Basically,
Can you enlarge it, Dan, just a little, just a little?
Yeah, sorry.
Dan, this is Dave. This was mine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't really make it larger. It's already, it's going to go off the screen actually. So that's as good as it's going to get. Do you want to comment? Sorry, who was that?
Dave.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, I was just, I mean, looking at the criteria, and I was just going back to what, like with CMAP, in one of the evaluations they gave, it was like 30 points, and they gave like 1 to 15. But I was thinking, like, could we, in each criteria, give a range, and say it equals 100, and first criteria is 1 to 40, and 1 to 30, 20, 1 to 10. And then it would equal, like the highest score would be 100. And then, if there is somebody wants to give something in between, they, like the first one, they give them a 20, for example, just to provide a little more flexibility. And like you're saying, like someone gives a 2.8 when they really weren't sure if it was a 2 or a 3. And then the top score would be 100 of the project.
Okay.
But, that's just the example, but whatever we come up with. So that was just my thoughts.
You're saying somewhat similar to the CMAC scoring on points, and I apologize, I'm not familiar with the CMAC, but I did confer with some of the transportation folks here at CMAP. So is this how you do it for all the CMAC stuff with this series of points, it sounds like?
Well, it was.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, with some of it were like for I guess think of the transit projects, that if it was if it was a new project, if it was affected transit speed, it was like 1 to 15, or it was part of the component. So depending on their criteria, you'd get, there's a range of points that you could receive. But it's very similar to what this is.
Can I ask a question? So the points actually replace the weights, and so if it's a more important criteria, you give it a wider range?
Well, I was just thinking, like, the first criteria might be the most important, and that's where you'd get 40 points.
Okay.
We do some of our evaluation proposals, bidding proposals like this, is where you'd give them the top, range, top score would be and then we could vary them, like the last criteria was only worth 10 points, for example, so maybe that's not as, maybe it's budget or schedule or something like that. But yeah, I mean, and I was just thinking like then we could focus on if there, you know, what's the guts of the project could be, you know, a higher score, potential scoring. You know, it could be 50% or, you know, 50 or 60, whatever. But just something depending on how many, you know, how many criteria we have too. That's the other factor.
So it's sort of similar to, I mean, this is really elementary, but this is sort of exactly how we would do like exams in high school or college, right? You
Yeah.
100 points and certain questions are worth a certain amount of points. It sounds like what.
Yeah, because the weighting issue, because I know when we do weighting, this is just from like evaluating proposals, our procurement office deals with the weighting and it just seems to get real complicated. I was just trying to keep it simple math for planners.
Okay.
So.
No, thanks for proposing that. That's
Sure.
an alternative option too.
So I got this question, I guess if Cameron's on the phone so I can understand. So if you have a project where based on what you've written on the Jamboard, where criteria 2, 3, and 4, you get top points, and maybe 1 you get in middle range, but you could actually win because you score high in the 2 through 4 criteria, but mid-range in the 1. So how do you guys deal? Is it still just whoever has the most points?
It is, Angela. You know, and I think Dave was kind of alluding to there's more points available for the criteria that are most important to the project selection process. So while yes, you could in those secondary categories amass enough points to score high and be funded, you know, typically because the point ranges in that program in particular are set up on very technical criteria, it's hard to, if your project doesn't do well in the most important criteria, it's hard to also do well in the secondary criteria. So
Okay.
I would say, can it happen? Yes. Does it happen? Not very often.
Gotcha. Okay. Because the concept of buying points, basically, that's what I was thinking. But you're saying the way, since they're so technical, if you don't score well in one, it's almost impossible to score well in other categories because of the technical link.
Correct. And the weighting of the most important criteria is so much higher.
Okay. Thanks,
And
Cameron.
weighting number of points, you know. Okay. You could score everything on 1 to 10 and then multiply it by your weighting, or you can just say, we're going to give 40 points to the thing that's the most important. So either way, it's still a weighting scheme.
This is Heather. I just want to agree with what Dave's saying. If we do weighting, do it the way he's proposed. It's much more straightforward and it's easier for everyone. But one thing I want to comment on is I think we want to wait to determine whether we have weighting or not until we know what the criteria are, to see if there are criteria that are more important than others.
Yeah, weighting to me would, well, it sounds like we scoring, weighting, number ranges could change every year depending on how you outline your criteria. But yeah, it wouldn't be something just etched in stone at all. I wouldn't think so. But you're right, we have to at least propose some categories of evaluation criteria that we would like to see in the program year in, year out. And then they would change based on focus. Like maybe 1 year if it's safety focus, and the next year if it's, you know, I'm not a planner, so this is a struggle for me. But whatever the topics are that are relevant for that particular fiscal year or call for projects, the weights they would adjust based on the outline of that. So Heather, you said that you like the between readiness and quality. Okay, those are great ones. So those would be criteria under which we would evaluate proposals. Can you elaborate on that a little for us, Heather?
Well, that wasn't my comment there.
Oh, I'm sorry, because
Yeah.
you always use.
Sorry. So who made the green comment? The scoring should be based on a blend.
Yeah, this is me. This is Philip from CDOT. I don't really have anything specific to add at this point, because I guess we don't know what our final criteria is going to be, but just a general point that I know a lot of just the reiteration that a lot of the reason why we're doing this is because we want to select projects that are more project ready, quote unquote. But we also need to kind of keep sight of the fact that, we're trying to pick studies and projects that are ultimately fit the criteria of and the vision of what the UWP is for, and what are the regional priorities that we want to focus on at a given time. So being able to blend the two, and whenever we have that conversation about criteria, we can probably talk in more detail about that, but just wanted to kind of bring up that general point.
Okay.
This is Dave again. The other thing was like the criteria, Angela, like for our procurements, based on what the criteria is for each one is a different set of percentage. So that's determined, and that could be done every year. Is that like you were saying, if this is the category that's the top one, this one gets the most, and it could be changed. I was just, like I said, I was just trying to keep it simple to make it easy to understand.
So when I look at what Phil wrote, so it sounds like we at least have some consensus that the scorecard is an appropriate approach. The group is leaning more towards a number range versus a percentage. And so if that's what I'm getting at from the group, so maybe the conversation should move more towards what does criteria look like? How do we evaluate projects? What are some of the things we should consider? So I was writing down Phil's list because a lot of those things are great. Readiness, can the project start immediately once the contract is started? And obviously we would have to define these. Again, we would have to give definitions so that when people are preparing their proposals and submitting their proposals and they're being evaluated, everybody's clear they have a definition of what these are. And so they are evaluated the same based on a uniform understanding. But quality of proposal, alignment with ONTO 2050, UWP planning processes. One other one I threw out there was funding strategy. Is this a project that we could feasibly fund over multiple years? And depending on the amount of the project, is this something we can fund in 1 year? Any other thoughts about what considerations we could include? So these are, any other thoughts about any other things? So when you think about your procurements, like one of the things we evaluate, we obviously alignment to ONTO 2050. One thing we look at is who's on the project. I don't know if we want to do that. Like if you get a well, maybe not, because that probably, what do you guys think about that? So one of the things we evaluate is the quality of the consultant and their previous experience on a particular project. I don't know, is that something that we think is appropriate to evaluate? Have that ever been a concern for any of the committee members, picking a consultant and getting into the project and realizing maybe this wasn't the right consultant for this project?
Hey, Angela, this is Jason from Metro. I'd be concerned about that because then you're bumping into the procurement process of each agency by kind of weighing in on that RFP process. So that seems like it might be a little bit problematic. You just kind of have to assume that every agency is doing what they need to do appropriately, and that you're not having an outside review and say, oh, that's a bad consultant or something. But I wanted to add that, there's certain things that we do in terms of requirements, that there's mandates and there's unfunded mandates. And so anything that's required to meet some sort of statutory or legal requirement, I think is an important criteria.
That's a big one.
Those things, you don't want to miss those.
Someone mentioned studies. They're concerned about criteria being able for those projects to be successful. What was the concern about studies and the relevancy of them being able to meet? Are studies so unique that we don't think that they would fall in these buckets of things we're considering and exploring?
Hi, Angela. This is Christina at CTA. Just to go back to the consultant question really quickly, it would be really difficult for us to have a consultant on board when we do a proposal for this funding.
Okay.
Just because we wouldn't be able to procure that until we were awarded the funding. So I don't know how other agencies.
So then that speaks to readiness. So remember I talked earlier about definitions. We would have to provide some definitions for each of these to be able, so when someone's reviewing or the organizations are reviewing other proposals, they can align it with these requirements. So readiness, let's use that as an example. How would we define readiness if procurement is a barrier to starting projects? How would the group define readiness? I'm using that one as an example. When you're rating for a proposal for readiness, what considerations would be important if procurement can't be one of the factors?
I think demonstrating that the agency has the resources lined up, the appropriate staff levels to manage the project. If you could demonstrate that your scope of work is at least ready to go through your procurement, I think those would be some things that would be easier to show.
Okay. Any other thoughts on what would define readiness? If you can't include considerations about procurement?
Perhaps the degree that consultant support is going to be used. The more a project's done in-house, I think it's reasonable to assume that the readiness is more within the ability of the requesting agency. If it's going to be entirely, farmed out, then I think that's a fair consideration to have.
Okay.
I think that's important for the application to outline if in fact the agency is doing it internal versus sending it out for consultant. But are we making a value judgment on which is better with that?
I would argue from a project readiness standpoint that in-house would be preferred for the movement of funds. I can understand how that could raise some questions, but from the strict standpoint of managing the funds, I think there is a preferable degree to moving projects in-house.
I guess maybe I have a follow-up question for Angela, which is we've been, at least you guys have come back to us about using funds for internal purposes in the past. As far as administrative funds, you said we couldn't use those to go towards that. So, and all of our competitive project funding had to go to outside consultants. So I just want to maybe clarify that.
Yeah, so this predates me. This is, and Tom is my historian on this one, because this conversation came up maybe my second year here. But at some point, the UWP committee voted that the core program would fund people, internal people, and that the competitive program would fund consultants only. I can't remember what year, that might have been 2016 that topic came up. And I reached out to a few of our historians on the committee. I think Dave Zeglin was one of them, and they confirmed that was the agreement. So normally that's how proposals are submitted. The core includes people that work for the agency, and the competitive is consulting. I think I've seen though in some, just knocked down my mirror, I'm sorry. In some cases I've seen where they might include some project management hours, but 90% of the funding under the competitive have been consulting dollars. So so this is our opportunity to talk about that, because I think John's point is, a good one. Is this the opportunity we now look at
I think,
internal projects?
I mean, I
versus-
think,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I just want to add, I mean, this is just speaking from Metra. I mean, the idea that we have staff available to undertake a study is very difficult for me to wrap my brain around in terms of like how important consulting services are for staff enhancement, that we don't have a pool of staff, and I'm guessing the same for everybody, that's just waiting for the next project. But having said that, there has been a dichotomy between readiness and funding availability. So the question has come back when it came time to make the UWP final numbers. What would happen if we cut you back this point? And that was always an interesting question, because if you had funded 100% the project and that you were fully committed to it, then the haircut could be greater because you already funded it, and you, in essence, just told the committee you don't need a dime to do the project. But on the other hand, it's like, well, it should be in your budget. So either you staffed up for it, you budget for it, and that those are important criteria. Like, are you ready for it? And those show that you laid the groundwork that this is an important study, that it wasn't just UWP season. So what's the greatest idea for a study right now, and put together an application. That it should be, you know, you should have been thinking about it when you're doing your previous year planning proposals in your budget in terms of what you're going to be doing and staffing up accordingly. Having said that, the practice has been UWP has been the call, and everybody's okay. What do we want to study or submit for? So I just wanted to put that out, that that's been the case in the past, that we've actually been penalized a little bit if you did budget for it, in effect, because the answer was we'd do it anyway.
Okay. John, can you speak a little bit on what you're, I mean, I get where you're going, that if it can expedite a project, is that something, you know, we want to look at as a component? What if a agency can say, yeah, we can do this internally a lot faster, quicker, and again, some agencies can do that and others not. What, you want to elaborate on that, John?
I'm not sure I can elaborate a lot at the moment. You know, not trying to get too deep but just talking at the conceptual level. You know, procurement seems to be such an issue in slowing projects up. Always has been, always will be. No matter the best processes we put in place, procurement's a different beast. It's hard to manage.
Right.
So what element of risk do we attach to that? Obviously, procurement adds a degree of risk to the timeline. It just does, and it always will. Any project that can come forward, mitigating that risk in some form or fashion, I think should be rewarded. Whether it's more work being done through internal staff, or whether there's other criteria or components or documentation that could say, hey, we're ready to go, you know, minute one as soon as we get this approved, whatever the case may be. You know, I'm not going to try to come up with all the answers. It's usually better when people try to get creative about it in the first place. But procurement is a risk to this process. You know, and that's anyone that can come up with ways to mitigate that risk, I think should be rewarded.
Well, John, oh, go ahead, Holly.
This is Holly. So you know, at the department, when we have something that we need to get done, that we want to get done, like a freight plan or long range transportation plan, you know, that we're going to go out, we will actually get that RFP prepared before we receive funding or whatever. So then it you know, it's ready. We can do that before we actually have the funding secured. You know, is that a potential solution or way to evaluate?
Hallie, I guess this is Dave. You know, one other thing, instead of maybe the scope of work would be something, because for us to move something in the procurement, we would need to identify that we have a grant agreement. I mean, we could only do so much, but we can't officially push anything through until we have a signed grant agreement and knowledge of that we have it. So basically, we could say that the project's coming along, but that's it. You know, I guess the other, you know, because the application is pretty simple of what you're going to do, but what if this might be, another step is what if there was a scope, at least identifying an outline of what the scope would be, and that would show preparedness of the project without having that commitment with because like I said, the procurement issue was going to be a factor because there's only so much we can do without having a commitment to the project and the funding.
Let me throw something out there as a procurement thought. What if there was a way that CMAP could, and we all together, developed a pre-qualified pool of regional planning services where all agencies, like a I forgot what we call the agreements, but a shared government agreement, basically, where at the time you're ready to enter into a project, you could use that pre-qualified pool of vendors that you have been a part of vetting and selecting to be on this list. And when you're ready to start your project, you would do maybe a PAO or a task order, which is a lot quicker process than a RFP and RFQ to get that vendor on board. Is that something that would help the procurement for all the agencies on the UWP? So readiness would be, so in this case, readiness would be easy to accomplish because you're going to have your scope already developed and you're going to use you're going to issue that scope to a pool of pre-qualified vendors, and you're going to select a vendor, and that vendor will be issued a task order or a PAO to do that work and start on that project. Is that something that would help on the procurement side?
Angela, who would manage that? This is follow up. Who would manage that? Would that be CMAP? That would manage that list?
It would have to. It would be regional, and so we would have to take the lead in hosting and yes.
Okay.
I think
We would have an agreement with all the agencies where that they could use. So it reminds me of the city of Chicago, how we had the pre-approved qualified list of IT vendors, and Cook County would use vendors from our list, and CTA would use vendors from our list. There was a shared pool of vendors, and if you needed to use an IT consultant, what you would do is issue a task order, or we call it PAOs at CMAP, for a scope of work, and then you would select a vendor, and you could use it based on language that's written in that agreement that allows partners to use that pre-approved comprehensive contract.
Angela,
counties that we wouldn't be able to do that for the counties because we're required under the federal regulations to do qualified base selection, and we have to do that for any engineering or planning. So I think for the counties that would be very difficult to do.
Engineering, I would agree, but for general or comprehensive planning, that would be in studies that would be difficult to do, Tom?
Yeah, I at least I know for the counties we've considered even planning services because it's usually done in combination with engineering. For planning and engineering services, we have to utilize the QBS process.
Okay. What about others? Would something like that be beneficial, or would
this is Jason from Metro. I mean, the pre-qualification of firms and the number of firms out there and who they are that can do the work isn't the problem with the procurement. We know who the players are for the most part, and every once in a while somebody new throws in a bid on an RFP, but they're the usual players. So I just say that's kind of solving a problem that isn't there, because it's kind of a short list. Now, if you're thinking about more like a blanket contract, which it sounds like you had at the City of Chicago, where basically there was a blanket contract to do on-call planning services to be funded out of the UWP, I wouldn't like that because it put the procurement of all that on the UWP or CMAP, and then basically we would be applying to get to use those services. And so I think that's the arrangement you must have had in the city, because I think you're saying pre-qualification, but they were already pre-approved and they already had a mechanism by which you were able to just select them as task orders, which
Right.
must have meant for the city of Chicago that they were already under contract with the city on kind of an on-call basis, and then the different departments were able to utilize that.
Yeah, the technical term we called it was a master agreement. I'm sorry. So there was a master agreement we entered into with all of these vendors that were pre-approved, pre-qualified based on categories. And to your point, they were already under contract, a master agreement. And if I'll just use Cook County, if they wanted to use IT services, they would already have a copy of that master agreement, and they would, on their own, they could issue a task order to whatever category of interest to the vendors in that particular category. So the benefit of this process is that we all agree RFPs and RFQs are a lengthy process. This mechanism allows you to kind of fast forward that process and get started into the project, because you're not posting this elaborate scope. You have a very defined, you've already know the vendors pre-qualified, pre-approved, they can do the scope of work. What you're doing is issuing maybe you're not issuing like the whole contract. They've already read your contracts. There's no negotiations of that. They're looking at the scope and they're telling you what they can do, if they can or can't, and at what cost. So I think we all, if we've had experience with task orders, those go a lot quicker than a formal RFP, RFQ process. So readiness could be defined by, readiness to me at that point would be a lower rating, because if you're using that pool of pre-qualified or pre-approved vendors under the master agreement, your procurement's gonna happen fairly quickly. So I just want to put that out there for thoughts, conversation, consideration.
Yeah, this is Heather. We use a task order, and I can say it doesn't save a ton of time. It saves a little bit of time, maybe a month while we're doing an open RFP, but it creates the entire extra time and effort to actually prepare a task order. And to do that just for one UWP project, I don't think that's going to make sense for anybody. But to go back to kind of the conversation about what could be project readiness, I keep going back to the scope of work, and just having a fully fleshed out scope of work that any partners have already reviewed and commented on. I know for us, when we do projects, normally the service boards are involved. We need to allow them to review and comment on a scope. There might be a community we're working with, and getting a scope that's really ready to go, because it can take months to get a scope just in place itself. So I think if you have a scope that's ready to plug into an RFP, that's going to save you some time as it is. I mean, I don't think we're going to get beyond this procurement hump here. It's a necessary evil. It's a necessary risk. So I think there's some things we can do to make it not take up so much time, but I think it's something that's going to happen. I'm a little concerned about the conversation that talks about bringing it in-house, because that's what the core funding is for. And if that's what we want to use competitive for, then why have a competitive program? And that's why we're here talking about how we can continue with a competitive program. So, I mean, the whole conversation is concerning me a little bit.
Yeah, I would also say that if I was to try to evaluate readiness, evaluating other people's projects, it'd be really hard for me to do that. I also, while I know it's an important aspect of what we're trying to more readily evaluate, I'm not sure I would put it in my top 3 criteria though for a project. I'd be more focused on the regional significance and how that project might be useful for other agencies in the region, and beneficial as far as learning different methodologies and approaches. I just think readiness is much lower criteria, even though I do understand it is important for expending the federal funds.
Let me ask a different question. So I hear that readiness can be defined by having a fully baked scope of work. We select projects based on that. what would be the recourse for the situation if an agency came back to us and said, you know, we got into the project, we had to change the scope because of certain elements, certain stakeholders, certain considerations, and it's going to delay our project, which we all know scope creep happens. But you've won the project based on readiness because your scope has been fully baked and it's gone through all your stakeholders. What's the consideration at that point? Or is that not is that something that's rare that happens?
I mean, I would say it's possible for that to happen. I guess I'm having a hard time seeing why that's a problem.
Well, I'll say, and John, he dropped off. I don't know if you remember in our first meeting where we talked about barriers to procurement, and the one thing John said, and John, please jump in if I misquote you, that once we award those contracts, there should be no scope changes. So that's why I brought it up again, because he did say that at that very first meeting. So if we're saying readiness, and I'm just putting this out here for conversation. If we're saying readiness, one of the components of that is a fully baked scope that's been reviewed by all stakeholders and it's not going to change. How do we deal with those scenarios where they do change in the midst of a project and it does impact the timeline significantly?
And I mentioned that because, you know, I've been on the committee for some time and I've seen these project status reports for years and years. And when you go back to the projects that are taking a long time, there's always talk about scope changes. You know, in the time it took to procure a project, conditions on the ground changed or the political winds kind of shifted a little bit, whatever the case may be. The longer a project takes, the more likely it's not going to be the exact same needed project as it was, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever the case may be. But just from a pure competition standpoint, again, you know, you compete for a project, and you know, I think there was more of it in the past. I think there is still some of it, as Philip's talking about. You know, agencies get together annually, say, okay, what can we put in for, as opposed to having a fully baked idea that's ready to go, that's where the timing's right. I think there's just history in this program of getting the best idea at the time. And then as you get into the idea, you realize, well, that's not exactly what we need. Things get delayed. And that's how we get into year 3. That's how we get into year 4. That's how we get into year 5. We have projects that aren't done within 5 years. Again, we can go through the project status list and look at those. They do exist. There's always talk about what's changed in the project during that time. I kind of like the idea of limiting scope changes because, again, you know what you want, you compete for what you want, you get awarded what you said you were going to do, and you get it done in the time frame that you were talking about. Again, that limits the flexibility on the committee. I know folks don't like to limit their own flexibility, but when we're talking about administrating a program, I think that's the cleanest, the most sensible way to approach it. Do what you say you're going to do and the time you said you're going to do it.
Yeah, I get that. And I think, you know, I'd be fine if there's some sort of policy limiting scope changes or whatever that is, but I don't see the relevancy to project selection. It seems like something that would come into play after you're selected in the program. Okay, now you're in the program. Here are the policies and the parameters that you need to follow. But I don't think it really has a place in project selection.
Okay, do we want to rule out readiness as a consideration for project selection based on procurement, based on what Heather mentioned, that maybe the better way to handle that is to just develop a policy that puts more parameters around scope changes and extensions and contract extensions and things like that? Is that a better approach, and not factor it in as a consideration for selection of a project?
Angela, perhaps just going through the exercise at some point of the application, describing when you think you'd be ready to move forward with it would help. Just we could start with the agency putting pen to paper, just saying when they think, given this timeline, that they would start. And you get in the practice of understanding the ins and outs of your own agency before you put that down. And you have to get better at that. It's the same thing with cost estimates. I mean, if you're used to just kind of throwing out wild numbers and they stick, then you don't ever refine them. And so maybe we could just start with the process of, maybe clarifying that a little bit. I'm trying to think in the application. I think it's just like a start year or something, but maybe we need to give some more thought about that. So at least each agency would do the homework and say, we think it'd take about this long to procure, where we're at, and then you could see it. And they would also have some internal thoughts about that, as opposed to just like, I don't know, 2022, we'll get it done.
Gotcha. Any other thoughts about readiness?
Angela, I think maybe, I think you got a lot of feedback during this call. And so maybe coming up with a proposal and bringing it back to the committee would be a good idea.
Absolutely. Then I guess we could quickly just go through the other ones. Again, these are the ones Phil put out here, and if they're better ones, let's throw them out. Quality of proposal. So I think that's something, if you look I'm sure in your procurement process, that's one of the evaluation criteria you use, how thorough it is. Does it speak to the requirements? What's your thoughts about quality of proposal as a evaluating criteria for project selection? And we would define it more, but I'm just trying to get a general sense so we can bucket some evaluation criteria for consideration. Is that something? So
I think in general, I think that's good. I would stay away from a blanket quality of proposal and put in those details though. And align with on through 2050, planning priorities, that's all good stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd keep those as separate items.
Gotcha.
So the quality would be meeting those objectives that were defined, like Heather was saying, like whatever on to 2050 or whatever those goals are. I mean, because how do you define the quality? It's the robustness of the proposal. I mean, is that where would be looking for?
So quality of proposal can be evaluated. I'm thinking of the procurement process, but it might have some applicability here. So was a project plan included? Were milestones and deliverables clearly outlined? Did the proposal put forth a good scope of work in general? Things like that, quality related to the proposal submission, not necessarily, because if we keep other things like align with on to 2050 and the UWP planning process, those would be evaluation criteria independent of quality of proposal. So quality of proposal in my mind is more like the things you want submitted in the proposal that would make it complete and a well thought through proposal. And maybe that's more, maybe quality could be considered more of the administrative things that a proposal must have.
Like the details of was everything thought through as what the steps, the process, deliverables.
Right, more the administrative side, right? Yeah. Not necessarily like its alignment to onto, because that might be an evaluation criteria in itself. But the completeness of it, did it provide all the information that we've requested in a proposal? That's quality of proposal, and so maybe we could call it the administrative components of a proposal.
Angela, I just follow up. I apologize for not adding more detail to this comment. But yeah, I mean, I think what you just said makes sense. And quality might be more in terms of how you thought about how the proposal was written in relation, the milestones and all the stuff that you just mentioned. I would say, we probably as a committee have to put some. I mean, we kind of do this already in some respects, but figuring out like how this blends with current regional priorities or onto 50 priorities, really kind of just discussing that within the proposal, I think is also a key thing, just in terms of understanding how that fits in with regional priorities. So I think both of those things kind of fit in with that kind of metric of quality. And we could flesh out the details later, but I kind of feel like we already do that in some respects. I just kind of wanted to reiterate that we should continue looking at that aspect.
Okay. So yeah, that was it. When I think of quality proposal, it was really just making sure, like one proposal, and this is a really bad example, but I can't think of one right now. Like you get one proposal with no deliverables and one with tons of deliverables, but we would outline it in such a way where if that's a requirement to meet quality of proposal, that would be something we would want to see in a project that's selected. So not necessarily the alignment necessarily with Onto 2050, but more just making sure it's a well thought out, comprehensive submission of a proposal is kind of the thoughts. Phil, you also threw out here alignment with Onto 2050, so that's a big one. And I guess I would want to, that one would take us some time to really think through. But I guess what I was hoping from this meeting is that seems like an evaluation criteria we would want to select projects on. Any thoughts? Or, I mean, we would have to flush that out year over year, like, what will be our focus? The plan is big. And so what types of projects would we be looking for in a particular call for projects? And how do these particular responses align with those, with the plan? So that in itself would need a little bit more flushing out. But what do we think overall about it being an evaluation criteria? Because we have two out here, and maybe Phil, you can help me understand the difference. You said align with Onto 2050, but you also said UWP planning priorities. Are they the same, or how can you help me understand that?
I mean, yeah, I think they're probably both about the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really I guess I was just throwing stuff out there. I don't know if it necessarily was like these are the exact criteria that we should have. I guess one thing is just, I mean, I think we do kind of, when we do our applications, we already kind of do this already. We talk about how it fits into on the 2050 goals. It's already embedded. So I guess continuing to do that. I mean, in a way, I don't know if we want to use it more strictly in terms of like, if there's certain priorities, I'm just throwing keywords out there like equity or safety, or, if there's certain themes that as a region that we're looking into that we want to push forward, and those are sort of the things that we're pushing for within the committee for a certain fiscal year. I mean, we could go that route, but I don't know if we want to limit ourselves like that. But I also want to throw out there that since we don't have a ton of competitive funds anyway, we might want to look at that approach because we just don't have a lot of money available in the competitive program versus the core program. So it's just stuff that, I mean, you're just throwing it out there. But in reality, I mean, I think we are doing this already in our application process, and asking people to think about how it fits into our long range planning and our regional priorities. So I think just continuing to do that, I think is a key thing. I don't know how we embed that into criteria, but something to think about.
So I would agree with you, Phil. We do that today. We approved that in September, October meeting, those priorities. the more stricter we have never talked about, so, or the themes for a particular fiscal year. Any thoughts about that from the committee?
I know that when we've tried to do that with STP and with CMAC, that it becomes a larger regional debate on what the priorities are, and it's very difficult to actually get the consensus that we might have started out thinking we might be able to pull together. I do feel like that obviously the alignment with the 2050 planning, the regionally significance of the project and that kind of stuff is absolutely the criteria that we want to evaluate. I know historically on the county side of things, we work with every single county and we get scoring from every single county. It's going to be, if these criteria get too complicated, I'll probably be left doing it all by myself with nobody giving me any assistance because of having to understand some of these components, whether it's readiness or quality of the proposal. I think the easier types of evaluation of the criteria we want to use, I think, is this what we're starting to talk about here. The alignment on 2050 or the regionally significant projects that really do play into our overall planning or programming process. So I do think this is the most important area. I'm just not sure what aspects to evaluate.
Any other thoughts on should we look at strict or themes every year as it relates to the alignment or planning priorities? Any thoughts on that? Because we do it today. I would agree. We've selected 5, and I've been, projects do align with those every year that we do get proposals, but we've never picked a theme. So like, is this year safety? Is next year comprehensive studies? So we've never done that. No.
Angela, do you want me to move to the Jamboard that has the comments on?
No, I think someone has their have their hand up. They had a question. You're on mute.
Sorry. I don't know if I see a hand.
You see him?
We can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
It's Mike Clemens. We can't hear him. He's got his mic open and we just can't hear him.
Hey, Mike.
Do we have to?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's something with your microphone. It says you should be able to talk, but can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
A little.
I'll speak up. Is that better?
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, sorry about that. The go-to meeting didn't like the earbuds, apparently. But I just had a comment on the idea of priorities. I guess my thought would be, rather than setting specific priority categories for a given call for projects, would be to try to incentivize projects that hit multiple goals of the Onto 2050 plan. So if a project addresses safety and the mobility goals, it would score better than a project that's just safety or something like that. The more areas of the Onto 2050 plan and its recommendations that a specific project would address, the better it would score, rather than trying to focus on specific categories in a given year. That would be my preference.
I think that's in our applications now. We ask them to, when they submit, to outline how many of the priorities are accomplished. One thing I know we also ask them to propose respondents to articulate how the project has regional, so like how does it impact more than one community or one, and that might be more difficult for like maybe the city of Chicago, but I think we've included that in, if you look at the form now, I think that's included in there. So multiple goals versus themes. I think that's kind of in line with what we do now. You can, when you submit your proposal, you can outline as many of the priorities that you think will be accomplished with your project. I wanted to circle back on something that was said by, I think it was, trying to remember who said it, requirements and statute, things that we're required to do by statute as a consideration, the must, the mandatory things. I can't recall who made the comment. Was it?
That was me, Angela.
Okay.
It's Jason.
So can you elaborate on your thoughts with that? I thought that was an interesting one.
Well, when we have the core or non-core, there's certain planning activities that are required by law. And so that's either required by a state statute or a federal statute, or it's just kind of an unfunded thing out there. So there's a few of those. And so, for example, there's certain things that are done in terms of data collection that support the regional model, right? And so that type of activity, if it wasn't done, couldn't plug into the regional model to give you what you need. So OD surveys, counts, other things like that, just basic data collection. Those things often fall on the burden of the implementing agencies that collect the data, funnel it to CMAP, and then the model works. But if we don't have updated data, then how good is the model? So there's a lot of that type of activity that occurs pretty regularly. There's certain types of survey work that's required for Title VI purposes and other things like that. Even at the state level, where there's customer satisfaction surveys that have to be done by the service boards, those are the type of activities that have to be done. And the agencies mount up and do it, and they're kind of core things. But then they're not really funded mandates or anything. So agencies are, do it to be in compliance, but they're not there. So, I mean, I think those types of core things have to be thought about. We don't have a huge amount of money here to even talk about in terms of what we need to do. But to the degree that agencies have to do those things anyway, I think those should be prioritized.
Yeah, I would add to that. I know that I've been attending these meetings for over 30 years, and I look back at the county levels. I mean, under the state statute, counties are required to have long-range plans, but they never had the money to do it. And it was UWP that facilitated the transportation planning at the county level. And without that, we might still have situations where there are no long-range plans, even though it's mandated by law. Cook County just recently, in the last 5 years, did their first transportation plan in over 50 years. And it was because of UWP funding that they were able to move it forward. And again, it's required by law. It's just nobody had the money to do it, and so it wasn't done readily. So that's just an example of good planning that's occurring at the sub-regional level, and a lot of those sub-regional plans are plans that actually are starting to get implemented, whether it's the bicycle level or the safety planning level, and so it's very important. It's just there's not enough funding resources out there to accomplish.
And I feel compelled. I have to respond a little bit to the last couple comments. Again, there are things that have to be done anyway. There are state statutes, but this is the federal transportation planning program. It's not intended to try to satisfy all state needs. It's not intended to try to satisfy all agency needs. A transit agency, I would argue, needs to be doing origin and destination studies just for the nature of their business. That's not a regional planning thing. Obviously, it should go into feed regional planning, but the agency itself has to do that work. That's a basic component of running a transit service. These are funds that are intended to support the regional process. There's plenty of rules and regulations on the MPO. That's what we do. We provide oversight of the MPO. We certify CMAP, we review them. We go through that process. Again, this is one of the few regions in the nation, have to bring it up every few years, that actually provides funding to its partner agencies. That's a pretty rare situation. So again, I just hope people appreciate that in the first place. But again, you know, federal transportation dollars cannot be seen as the solution and all be all for all the funding needs of all the various agencies and for state statutes and things along those lines. Again, just kind of have to feel the need to course correct maybe a little bit and make sure our expectations are aligned in terms of what these funds are intended to be providing.
Yeah, I guess, John, I would concur, and I think we all recognize that to the point where the MPO aspects of these fundings now takes close to 90% of it. There's very little left over. So I don't think that's what we're arguing for. I think what we're saying, though, is the importance of these competitive funds, because we can do all this MPO requirements, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the needs of the general public for the region. We'll just be pushing paper otherwise. Most of the stuff that actually is occurring that benefits transportation is occurring at the local and sub-regional level. And so that's all I'm saying. It's a very important funding resource for some of these planning efforts and where it actually translates for benefits to the public.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And I think we've been very creative. I think the whole concept of the Council of Mayors, again, is a relatively unique way to address that. You don't see that, especially in large metro areas. Chicago region does a great job of trying to reach down into that sub-regional level. Again, I think we can continue with that. I think the more we strengthen this program, though, the more dollars that are going to be at the table. Again, the states had difficulty spending SPR funds for years. Holly and Bruce can contest to that, or you know, when discretionary funding opportunities come available. I think there's more opportunities for funds the more we tighten this program up. It's difficult to make a case saying that you guys have needs that we can fund when we have projects that are sitting around for more than 5 years. When we have a laundry list of projects on that status update sheet that should have been done long before they are. That's why I think readiness needs to be, if I'm not sure how it needs to be factored, but it needs to be factored. Again, you know, people on this committee represent agencies trying to get great work done, and that's the priority. But the better we can manage this program, the more opportunities we're going to have to do that. It's not just, you know, if we're just fighting over the crumbs that's left, Tom's absolutely right. There's fewer and fewer dollars available, and I don't see that trend changing. I think it's going to get tighter and tighter in terms of, you know, the UWP funding, the PL and 5303 funds that the federal agencies can provide to the process. But that doesn't mean the overall pot can't be attacked in different ways. But I think some evolution of the program is necessary to stay competitive.
Thanks, John.
Angela, I thought I might pipe in for a minute because we've talked about lots of subjects. This is Amy McEwen from CMAP. And I guess my question is, I know one of the major issues is to speed up the time to project, I'll say, meaning bring the dollars that are collected in the competitive program to the benefit of the public so that the public gets the benefit of whatever that project is. And maybe to that end, I don't think we talked about setting some time parameters around certain sections of the project, meaning, hey, if I get these funds, I'll commit to complete this project within X amount of time, or I'll commit to complete the procurement for this project within X amount of time. And maybe that could contribute to the committee's consideration when it's deciding what projects to fund. And they could make a choice between, hey, I'm committing to get a project A done in 3 years or whatever the number is, and someone else is a longer time period. Then the committee can talk about you know, whether they value that time frame or that quicker time frame to get a benefit to the public as one of the criteria.
I'll jump in. So that's a good one. We hadn't had it on the list. We did talk our last meeting was focused on performance management, and the committee kind of thought that the best way to do that was to submit full project plans, which outlines critical path, deliverables, milestones, when the project would be completed. So to piggyback off of that, I guess the question for the committee would be in response to what Amy is saying, if that was a evaluation criteria, would you be ready with your proposals to present those fully vetted project plans that can that could I'm sorry, go ahead, Holly, you were gonna go.
I was just going to mention, you know, I think what Amy's speaking about is kind of on the tail end, like the project's funded and we set some targets.
Right,
and,
we did.
You know, I think that could probably be included in a proposal that you all develop for the committee, along with determining how we would look at readiness. I think it's kind of similar in like the initial funding and then also the implementation.
Absolutely. Okay.
So Angela, Dan, do you all think you have some good ideas about non-readiness criteria, or is there some more discussion
I just wanted to circle back. I was going to try to insert it before, but I think it's something Jason said or somebody from Metcha in regards to the fully funding of projects, because that's actually when I'm vetting the scoring, not vetting, but when I'm sorting the scoring, that is one thing that we do come back to. And I just wanted to touch back on that because I wasn't clear. Should we be talking about whether all competitive proposals that are coming in should be considered at 100% or not? Like 0 to 100 or no go, you know what I mean? Because it does get confusing when some people do say, well, we could go down to this, or we could. I think that's something we should maybe just touch on a little bit more so I understand what's wanted.
Yeah, that was one that I threw out, funding strategy as an evaluation criteria. So to your point, Dan, that's a good one as well. Example, you submit a proposal and it's $100,000 project. You only need $50,000 from the UWP program because in addition to match, you have other sources to fund the project, and you, according to your project plan, you can expend that funding in a year. So, and obviously people are going to have different parameters for funding strategy, but do we think that is something to consider when we are looking to evaluate proposals as a criteria? How are projects funded? If it's, yeah, go ahead. I can't tell who's talking, Holly?
Yeah, it's Holly. So are you referring to like overmatch?
So I guess you could say that because we do have like CTA and Christina, she's still on the call, maybe she can speak to this. They typically bring large scale projects to the for consideration, but they will say, we've got funding for, we only need 30% from the UWP because we've got 70% from another source.
So
because the project is so large that we couldn't fully fund under the UWP.
Okay.
So more in line with that, or a funding strategy could be simply that you don't require all the funding in one fiscal year, which means you wouldn't be taking up a big pot of the UWP in that one fiscal year. Maybe it's a project that you can align over multiple years. So it's, you know, funding strategy is a tricky one because I haven't really thought about how do you compare apples to apples because people are going to submit proposals in different ways. But I do want to put it out there. If we think that that's an evaluation criteria, or if that's something we simply look at in terms of funding strategy in general.
I know other programs that looking at looking at overmatch or leveraging other fund sources is something that's looked upon favorably. However, there's always the challenge that it still could be a good project, and there aren't other funding available or other resources. So that's a tough one. I think for spend plans, I think that's probably my take on that. It's kind of getting in the weeds a bit.
Okay.
And this is Dave. I mean, we haven't done multi-year programming, have we, on competitive?
Dave, I think what they're referring to is that the project in and of itself is maybe $1 million, but it spends $200,000 every year for 5 years. It's not programmed that way, but the way that the money flows through the accounting and stuff, it goes that way.
Okay. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
There's a different way we could handle funding strategy without it being as an evaluation criteria. That could simply come in the form of what you submit in your project plan, and the committee look at that and see if it's viable, makes sense, and it allows for multiple projects to be awarded in a particular fiscal year. So you're right. I don't know if we need to take a deep dive in that right now. So any other comments before, any other thoughts?
I guess I just had a comment about just really considering what is required administratively of people whose projects are funded versus what's an evaluation criteria. Because it seems like there's just a lot of tightening up of what's required after you've been awarded the grant versus what actually makes your project worth getting the grant.
I think it might be a combination of both, if I'm understanding your question. I think we're looking, go ahead, Christy, I'm sorry.
I just, I know a lot of things have been thrown out and I don't know what's going to end up in the final recommendation, but it's like suddenly we're looking at full project plans, we're looking at full project scopes, we're looking at funding plans, and it's just, I think maybe something that someone said earlier, it's like if we make this so onerous to compare and contrast all this stuff, it just becomes more difficult to evaluate this stuff. So it's like what can just be taken care of administratively versus like what is actually what we're trying to evaluate.
So I think if I remember correctly, I think the plan is to develop a proposal and then bring it back to you all, which is going to have to happen before September, right? And so proposing having another meeting before then to take all the feedback that's been received and put it together and then have you all talk about it so it's clear. We've thrown out a whole lot of ideas today and received a lot of feedback, and I think that helps us draft that proposal.
Is there any thought to when you think that might be ready for us to review?
I'm going to, what we need to do next is send out the notes from this meeting and have everyone review and make sure they're accurate, that we've captured everything. Once we get that back, I'll start the work. So my goal is to get a plan in front of everyone third week of June.
So I have a UWP committee meeting on my calendar for I think June 9th.
Oh, do you? Oh, wait a minute. You might be right.
Did I make that up?
No. You might be right. I think I'm off. Yeah. Actually, I don't see it on mine.
I don't have it on mine, but that might just be an adjustment that was made when we shifted. So I will check on that and see if it's. Let's see.
Yeah, I have it on mine too. This is Holly.
Yeah, I think that is a legacy thing from when we moved up the schedule. So we'll have to follow up on that. But we could. adjust that meeting to be a little bit later to, after the mid-June date. So maybe July.
What I recommend is let me get a draft agreement to everyone by the 3rd week of June. Allow everyone an opportunity to review it, and then we can schedule, if everyone's open to a July meeting, to talk about it. I would rather give you time to look at it, think about it, talk to other internal staff on the viability of the proposal, and then come back in July to meet and discuss.
Sounds great.
I think if we do everything in June, like me, write, submit, that's really tight for, and it doesn't allow a lot of time for the committee to review it.
So we're saying July, not June, but date to be determined?
Yeah, I will get the proposal to everyone the 3rd week of June, that's for sure, but we can map out enough time for everyone to review it and plan for a date in July.
Great.
That's good, Angela. And I was just going to add, Angela, Philip, not to add extra burden to your workload, but it might be good to have like maybe at least 2 options to consider for the committee to consider. Sorry to add an extra layer of homework here, but I mean, I think having just one option may be difficult. It might be good to kind of pick from 2. I don't know if others feel differently, but that'd be just my initial thought there.
So Phil, the only challenge I foresee with writing that is that because there's been so many things written, thrown out, I could change any 2 variables and come up with maybe 12 scenarios. So I would recommend me writing a plan, and then the conversation changes the components of the plan, because there are so many options of a plan I could think of. I wouldn't even want to limit it to 2 if that's the case. I would rather just write a plan, taking into consideration everything I've heard, and put it out for the committee to review and opine and provide their feedback. I think writing 2 plans is going to be more challenging, because you could come up with so many varieties of a plan from all the feedback that we've received.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, all right.
Okay, do we have anything else to cover under this agenda item? What I understand is we've received a lot of feedback. CMAP staff is going to develop a plan and send it out to the group the 3rd week of June. And then they will schedule a meeting in July to consider the plan.
All the great, it just went right here from that timeline.
Great. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 5, CMAP planning update.
So I just want to preface, I think, Stephanie, are you on? Yeah, there we go. So over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody on the UWP committee. Such a good conversation today. With the UWP competitive projects, we wanted to do an update for the group on the technical assistance projects, but knowing that that's already been a long day and that you had a lot to talk about over the last few meetings, we've actually put together just a short recording with a couple of updates on our Beecher comp plan and then our Northern Lakeshore Trail connectivity plan. And so Dan is going to be following up with the committee to send you a link to the video so you can get an update on it, and then happy to answer any questions. You can reach out to me or Jonathan Birch, whose contact information is on the video. But we won't take up time today, but wanted to make sure, because we had not been before you with an update for a while, so we wanted to give you an update.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
And I'll be working. I'll be working with Joey and sending out that link hopefully by tomorrow.
Great. Okay, on the agenda we have next meeting September 8th, but we know that there will be a meeting before then, so stay tuned for that. And then do we have any public comment? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Tom Rickert.
And
Second.
Heather? Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing this proposal and having more discussion about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to CMAP for putting that proposal together. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
Oh.
thank you, CMAP.
Thanks, you guys.